Now, joining me is someone who does think we should push harder on moving to electric cars. Bruce Mountain is not as sceptical as I am about what's called the global warming crisis or the need to do something about it. So I'm not talking to a skeptic here, but I am talking to someone who said from the start that the politicians and the boosters were wrong about the Snowy 2.0 scheme. He predicted early on that it would cost 5 times more than the Turnbull government claimed and would take years longer. And he was spot on both counts. Must be a genius. Bruce Mountain is Director of the Victoria Energy Policy Centre at Victoria University, and he joins me now. Bruce Mountain, I find this absolutely amazing, right? You don't have government departments behind you. You don't have hot and cold running experts doing your bidding to find out all the details, yet you knew what the government didn't, that this would cost 5 times more than it was saying. How did you arrive at that conclusion so fast and they didn't?
Hi. Well, I dare say many in the government did know, but they were loath to say it. This was a project of desperation in 2017, a prime minister in a corner who was looking for a nation-building project. Pumped hydro can be useful, but it's a technology that has not found much currency in rich countries, at least for the last 30 years. It tends to be extraordinarily expensive, and we could see straight away that the $2 billion claim was just not plausible. It couldn't be possible to find a power station in a worse position in our grid. And so I think we could see, I dare say there were many bureaucrats within departments and perhaps staff working for the energy regulators and others who didn't think much of it either, but perhaps they didn't have the freedom that I did to basically say so.
Let me get into why it is that the costs are blown out in a second, but let me stick with this. See, from my point of view, exactly what you've said is exactly what makes me sceptical with whether it's the Andrew Forrests or the Tim Flannerys and the politicians who latch on to whatever it is they're spruiking at the moment and at the time and say, this is a solution and we're going to throw lots and lots of taxpayer dollar at it and this will save you, etc., etc. It seems to me these politicians don't seem bound by the same rules of science and of honesty to actually front up about whether or not these schemes will work, that they're selling salvation and it seems almost immoral to question what they're doing. Is that a risk with some of the plans that we've been sold over so many years now?
I think in general, I think it's right to be sceptical of many of these claims. I think some, like Snowy 2.0, are so obviously appalling, we felt we stood little risk by calling it out in the early days, and we felt it worthwhile to study since. And at every step of the way, we could see it was badly flawed. I think in general, on major infrastructure changes, climate changes, technology shifts, there are many unknowns, and some of those things succeed. For example, solar subsidies. I was one of those who in the early years drew attention to the extensive size of the subsidies and thought the policy could be a big problem, and said so. I published papers saying that. I was wrong when it turned out that solar unit costs came down drastically. So I don't think one can always be right. I think we've been proved right on this, and we've been happy to stick our neck out on several issues. I think it's quite right to be sceptical. Of course, different actors have different incentives, and they say things for a range of reasons. And I do think healthy skepticism and a critical eye on many of these claims is very worthwhile.
Unfortunately, though, you're talking about people who are selling salvation, and not many buyers will then start looking close enough at the price. But let's go to the nuts and bolts here. How did the costs blow out by 5 or 6 times more than we were promised? And that, by the way, I'm assuming that there's going to be no more future blowouts, and I'm not sure of that either.
Yeah, so I think there's several factors. I think the first and the biggest by far is the incentives on the politicians pointing to Snowy 2.0 were to understate the cost and overstate the benefit. And it was patently obvious right from the very beginning that they'd done that not just on the direct costs of the project, but on ignoring all of the massive transmission infrastructure that's necessary to get the produce to market. Secondly, they excluded a whole lot of on costs, the Snowy costs that are incurred in actually managing the project, in funding it during the period that it's being built, in land access, in easements, and so on and so forth. So they've sliced and diced as it suited them. That's the one major reason. I think it's been understated, and as more and more of the costs come out into the public domain, it looks like the cost is going up, but the costs were always dear. I think in the recent past, no big surprise, they're discovering that building this phenomenally complex, one of the largest pumped hydro power stations in the world, in Snowy Mountains, distant from everything, extremely expensive place to get people to and to house, is jolly expensive. No big dream. I mean, we all knew that. And then I think thirdly, there are changes in the costs of goods and services. There have been claims about the cost of steel and the cost of copper. I wouldn't pay that too much mind. They haven't really even started on the substantive work yet. What they're seeing is their costs as a consequence of the project. So
honestly, Bruce Mountain, when you go through that, I'm thinking it's less like, oh, well, you know, they were blinded by ideology, more like they were lying to us, to be perfectly honest. But I won't ask you to go there. But at $10 billion or $12 billion, look, $15 billion for all I know it's going to end up. Is Snowy 2.0 ever going to be worth the money we've spent?
No, it was not worth its money when they did their project studies and they excluded the vast bulk of the cost. We think it will have very limited use in the market. We believe other technologies are likely to meet the services that it's going to provide at much cheaper cost. It will be many, many years late, I would say, perhaps even as much as 5 or more. I think on our latest costing, we were at 15 billion. I now think it's going to be more. We started off saying it was 10 and we were laughed at. It was impossible. We said recently at least 14. We now say it's going to be more than 14. This is a very great waste of public money.
Bruce Mountain, thank you so much for enlightening us. I appreciate your time. There you have it. Politicians getting the global warming fever. And when you look at Chris Bowen, right, the climate change minister today, you look at his eyes. It's got this far away gaze. You can see the light. He's so short with anyone who says, oh, listen, I'm not sure your electric car scheme's going to work. Doesn't want to know. Same sort of mentality. They want to promise the world they're going to save you. And they don't look at the primary technical difficulties in front of them. And you're on the hook. $15 billion. You just heard it. $16 billion. Who knows? For a Snowy 2.0 scheme from Malcolm Turnbull that we probably won't even have to use much at all. It is a disgrace. And it's going to happen again and again unless we're all a lot more careful.